everyone, and welcome to Gruff Talk, where each week we take a deep dive into all the ways we can feel better, look better, live better, and age better. I'm your host, Barbara Hannah Grufferman. I've always been fascinated by the concept of karma. Do good, and good will come back to you. Behave badly, and, well, suffer the consequences, right? But karma, as my guest today will explain, is a bit more complicated than that, and in fact plays a starring role in getting unstuck and hopefully finding true happiness. Dr. Douglas Gentile is Distinguished Professor in Liberal Arts and Sciences at Iowa State University and is considered one of the top experts on the positive and negative effects of media on children and adults, really just everybody. But I discovered Dr. Gentile while reading an article in a medical journal which focused on his latest book about karma, about getting unstuck and finding happiness. That's also when I discovered that he is not only a renowned psychologist, expert on the media, was named one of the top 300 professors in the United States by the Princeton Review, but he is also a Zen monk. Oh, and did I mention that he's a pretty accomplished jazz musician? His very thoughtful and thought-provoking book, Finding the Freedom to Get Unstuck and Be Happier, delves into the many ways we all have a tendency to repeat negative patterns of behavior, very often which started way back in our childhoods, while offering ideas on how harnessing the power of karma can help reverse a lot of that negativity and bring, perhaps, some freedom and some happiness. Well, I would like to talk today with Dr. Gentile about a lot of different things because he is an expert on so many things. We're going to zero in on karma and happiness. So get yourself into a nice lotus position or just plop down on a comfy couch with a glass of wine or a cup of tea and enjoy this chat. Hello, Dr. Gentile, and welcome to Gruff Talk.
Thank you for having me.
So, I saw you on YouTube, and not only are you an expert in the effect of media on children and adults and really everybody, and you're a Zen monk, which is amazing, but you are also a jazz musician. So what instrument do you play? What do you play?
I am the primary bass player for my jazz band, but I sometimes also rhythm guitar or ukulele, and I sing.
And you sing too. Oh my goodness.
And if you really need me to, I can go back behind the drums and mostly hold down a song or two, but by doing nothing fancy. The minute I try to do something fancy, it all goes to hell.
Well, let's see how much time we have. And then maybe we'll sing like a little duet or something, or maybe not.
Perfect.
I mean, you can sing. Maybe I'll bow out. But anyway, let's get to what we really need to talk about today. You recently wrote a book, which I absolutely loved, called Finding the Freedom to Get Unstuck and Be Happier, in which you make the point that many people don't really understand what karma is. I mean, they have this notion of karma that's just not really right. So please explain, what is karma?
Sure. Well, yeah, I think most people think of it as some type of cosmic bank account where you get good karma points that get stored up to be spent sometime in the future, or bad karma points, or they think of it as some type of seesaw, that if I do a good thing, I'll get a good thing. If I do a bad thing, I'll get a bad thing. That is not at all what karma really means, at least not within the Buddhist traditions. The word itself just means action, in the sense of actions beget reactions, that our actions have consequences. And that's really the most important thing, is that we often think our actions don't matter all that much. But in fact, everything we do matters a great deal. And what carries a lot of the meaning in our actions is our intentions. And we know this in many ways. What's the difference between murder and manslaughter is all about intention. Either way, someone was killed, but did you intend to kill them or not? Can really change the consequences of how, say, the victim's family feel about it, the way you feel about it. So when we go into any type of decision, Our intentions matter. The action we end up taking matter. The words we use matter, because those will have consequences. And that's really all it means, is we should be paying better attention. And the only time we really think about that is when we're watching a movie that has time travel. And we think about how, if you go back into the past, you have to be really careful not even to step on one tiny little bug, because that could change the whole future, right? Why don't we take that same level of care with everything we're doing today?
Oh, that's such a great
Because
point.
every tiny little thing you do today is changing the future. And so that's one, that's kind of at its basic level, is that our thoughts matter, our words matter, our deeds matter. And so we should be paying attention.
Right.
The second mistake that we make is we think of it as an individual thing, that you are the inheritor of your actions, that of your karma. And on the one hand, that's true, but it's only partial, because we also inherit other people's karma.
In what way?
So if you are driving and a drunk driver runs a red light and smashes into you, that's not your fault. That is not your karma. That wasn't your action. That was the drunk driver's action. And yet you will still have to suffer the consequences of that action. So we have relational karma, that the people we're in relationship with, either a close relationship or even you don't know the person, they just hit until they hit you. We can suffer the effects of their actions too, which is really important to recognize, because I have heard karma misused in a way that blames the victim too many times. If you were abused as a child, telling people that that's their karma, they must have done something bad in a previous life to deserve that. No, oh my God, what a damaging thing to say to someone.
Oh my gosh, I know. It
wasn't their action. It was the perpetrator's actions. They just were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And yet they still have to deal with the consequences of it, which again comes back to my main point of everything matters.
Everything we do matters. I mean, we are all connected. I hate to use a kind of such a simplistic term, but we are.
Well, and it's simplistic to say, and yet it's very complicated. If we've learned nothing from the COVID pandemic, and I think that's true.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're right.
I think we should have learned just how deeply interconnected all of us are across the world. And so that brings up a third type of karma. We have our individual, we have our relational, we also have communal, that you might live a carbon neutral lifestyle. And yet with global warming happening, you still suffer the consequences of that.
Right.
And you have to take actions based on other people's bad choices of how to manage their lives.
I mean, we're seeing that, played out in so many ways, but also very recently that's been brought to our attention through reports in the news about countries that are suffering the consequences of the more advanced, if you will, countries' actions.
That's a funny word
advanced,
to use.
Probably wrong word, because how advanced are we really?
You said with your question that you loved the book. What was it that you found meaningful about this discussion of karma?
Well, it really made me realize that I, like so many other people, didn't have a very good grasp of what karma meant, because I was thinking in terms of how you described it initially, how people really do view it. Oh, I did something bad, so bad things will happen. I did something good, so goodness will come my way. And that's just way too simplistic. So I found that to be really eye-opening. But also, I so enjoyed how you followed the path of a very dear friend of yours and the lessons that were learned by her experience. And I just learned a great deal from that whole exchange. But, let's get back to karma, because I find it fascinating, and because it's a fascinating concept. How will an understanding of karma help us to get unstuck and maybe help open our eyes to some of those patterns of behavior that we all kind of seem to hold on to, many of which have their origins early in our lives, and we just can't seem, and many of them are quite negative, And we find it very hard to shed them or change them. So how can an understanding, I mean, I already learned a lot from your book, but I want the audience to hear from you.
Sure.
How can karma help us here?
So karma is an interesting word because it's one of the few Sanskrit words that has not been translated into English. Almost all the others, like mindfulness, another one that comes from these same traditions. We call it mindfulness rather than smrti, which would be the Sanskrit word for it. Why is this one left in its original language? And I think I can't answer that question. Mm-hmm. But I think if we were going to say what would be a modern synonym for it, I think the modern synonym would be learning. If we think about when you enter a totally new situation, you have no idea what to expect. And so you open it, or you go into it very open and fresh, and the experience is in some ways surprising, and you're curious, and it's kind of raw many times because you don't know, and so you just experience it in its fullness. The second time you have that same experience, it's very different. It's not nearly as raw. It's not nearly as open and curious, that you kind of know what to expect, and you perhaps seek one part of the experience and you perhaps try to reject another part of the experience. Now, I can talk about this generally, but I don't know if you've ever had the Southeast Asian fruit durian.
No, I haven't.
It's a weird fruit. It's about the size of a soccer ball, except it's hard and has jagged spikes on it. And you have to chop it open with a machete. And inside...
It sounds like a kind of melon?
It's not. Inside there are 3 seeds, usually. Maybe it might not always be 3, but they're about the size of a man's hand. Mm-hmm. And covering the seed, or the stone of the seed, is the meat of the seed, which is kind of a custard-like substance. And its smell is usually described as a combination of skunk, sewage, wet dog.
Oh, lovely. Yummy.
And the flavor is kind of like smoky, sweet scallions. And so it is a sensory overload. And people generally love it or hate it. And so the first time I had it, I was like, what the heck is this? This is a weird texture. That flavor does not match the smell. And that smell is really difficult. And it lingers for hours, by the way, after you've had it. So if you don't like it, that's difficult for you. The second time I had it, I've had it 4 times now. I'm clearly in the I don't like it because it never gained a taste for it. But the second time, I didn't approach it nearly as openly. And I just had one taste and then went, no, I still don't like it. And, that's it. That's karma. That's the effect of we took an action and there's a consequence of the action. Sometimes that consequence is just inside the individual like that. You like it or you don't like it. Sometimes the situation provides a consequence where it rewards you or punishes you or opens up other opportunities or closes off opportunities to you. And we learn from that. And so,
Doctor, it begs the question, why do you keep on trying it? You said 4 times and you're clearly in the I don't like it.
Yeah, well, there are 2 reasons. When I was working in Singapore and having these experiences, some people told me it's an either you love it or hate it. And other people said...
An acquired taste.
Acquired taste. And so I tried it enough times to realize I am not acquiring this taste.
Okay, so you're done, right? You're not having this anymore.
I'm not having it anymore. But also, I come from a family, my uncle, he's traveled all over the world, and he always wants to have the weirdest thing. And then if his reaction is, oh my God, that's terrible, his reaction is, I'll have another. Because he wants to know, does he really hate it? Or is he missing the point?
I love that about him.
Yes, I do too.
I think that's great. I have a little bit of that in me. It's like, it can't be that bad. I'll have to try it again. Let me see.
Exactly. Yeah. Could this really be this terrible? I don't think so. Let's have a second one and see if it's really just as bad.
That's great. But let's get back to about those negative patterns of behavior that you write about in the book so well. And it's like, again, how do we apply karma? Like, how can it really help by having a better understanding of what karma really is, as you've been explaining, that will help us to better understand these patterns of behavior and maybe help us to get rid of them or at least acknowledge and understand them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Undermine their hold on us, at least. Well, why do you like the things you like? And why don't you like the things you don't like?
Mm-hmm.
Well, a lot of the reason for that is because of past experiences. You had past experiences where you either got rewarded or got punished, and that made you seek it more or seek it less. And many of these experiences you had very young, so you don't even know why you don't like something or you think you don't like something. But you just tell yourself, oh, I've never liked this, which is funny because we also know tastes change.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't allow that openness in ourselves because we've had enough experiences in the past that we've got this idea we only like it this way. We've had enough experience with things and the way we've been rewarded and punished throughout our lives that we have habit energy.
Yes.
That's very strong toward some things and against some things. We have ways we like to feel. We have ways we don't like to feel. And we think of this as just who we are. And at one level, that's correct. At this moment, that is who you are. But it's not who you always were. Mm-hmm. Previously, you were more open in some of those ways.
Right, like a clean slate.
To close it off.
Blank slate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not truly a blank slate, but we were blanker at any rate.
Yeah, blanker.
And here's where we get into the weirdness about free will. We, as Americans, generally believe that doing what we want is our free will.
Right.
Well, we usually define doing what we want as getting more of what I like and getting less of what I don't like. But the reason you like what you like and don't like what you don't like is because of your past experiences. You're not at all exercising free will. You are actually being completely controlled by your karma. You're doing the same thing you always knew you would have done anyhow.
Right.
Which means it's not a free choice in the least. It is a completely controlled by your past choice. And until we recognize that, we're going to just continue to keep doubling down on all the same things that we've always done. And if those things get us into trouble, we date the same type of person and then wonder why we're always unhappy. We have the same fights with our spouse or our children or our parents over and over, even though we know we don't want to, which is a really interesting thing. You're going home for the holidays and you know you're going to get into the same fight with your mother you always do, and you don't want to. Aren't you an adult? Can't you do what you want and don't do what you don't want? How come you still get stuck? And it's because that habit energy is so strong. And the ways you've learned over the years to try to cope with the situation you don't like aren't actually effective, but they kind of make you feel a little bit better, like yelling at her. You do it to make yourself feel better, but it actually never makes you feel better. And yet we don't know how to break out of that strategy. Strategy is another word for karma, again, where you're being controlled by your past and your expectations of the future rather than actually entering a situation going, I don't know what's going to happen here. Let's see.
So you're a renowned psychologist and also a Zen monk. So you're really coming at these challenges from two, very different angles through two different lenses. So are you saying, I want to stick with free will for a minute because it's a fascinating, just like karma concept. And, you do state in your book that free will is, as you said, not a free pass to do whatever you want to do. So how can a better understanding of our negative patterns of behavior and karma and the concept of free will kind of help us get unstuck, free us and find which is the, kind of the goal here of your book and what we're talking about, and find some happiness. How do we do that? Is this a psychological challenge, or is this something that we can sit down and meditate on?
Well, both. There are lots of paths to wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that there's only one path. And so science certainly has a lot to tell us about this. And every spiritual tradition has a lot to tell us about this. And I think they all have wisdom. And so I think our job is to try to figure out which of those ways of talking about it, which of those paths feels like we can do it with some authenticity. So I don't even think no one needs to follow my path unless that's the one that works for them.
Mm-hmm.
But how do we truly get unstuck? Well, first of all, we have to recognize that I think as a core motivation, most people want to be happy. So if that's the truth, why is it so many of us aren't? And then we have to look at what is it we're doing that we think makes, that we do to try to be happy? And is it really working? And I think when we start exploring that, and we can do that, and again, several ways to access that wisdom of your own. It could be through meditation. It could be through working with a therapist. There are lots of ways to get at it. But we hold that wisdom ourselves. We just have to be more honest with ourselves than we usually like to be, which is to say, this is my typical response to this type of difficult feeling or this type of difficult situation. Does it actually work, or does it just give me some type of temporary relief, but it keeps me stuck? And I think when we examine it, we will find that a lot of the time, it doesn't even give us that much relief. Like you're angry and you can, typical things lash out.
Yeah.
Or repress or run away.
Yeah.
Those are three very typical types of managing your anger. None of them help you. Some of them might be necessary in a given situation. There are times when it's important to yell at someone to stop them from
retreat.
Doing. There are times when it's important to retreat. So I'm not saying they're never functional, and I'm not saying they're never not the right thing to do in that moment. But we often have a strategy. There are people who tend to lash out a lot, and there are people who tend to retreat all the time. And then they keep being stuck in situations where that's what they have to do, rather than having other options. And we don't even recognize how stuck we are. And so one of the silly examples I use is, let's say I come up to you and I call you an asshole and I slap you right now. What do?
I'd probably slap you back. No, I wouldn't. I'd go, what?
You probably
no,
wouldn't.
I would say, what? I'm sorry, what? That would be my reaction.
Okay,
what?
That's a good reaction. At least that's a really great reaction, because that's not what I hear from most people. Most people, men, there's a sex difference here. Men usually would be slap you back.
Yeah, I actually wouldn't do that, but okay.
Women tend to be more get scared, maybe cry.
Yeah.
Almost no one says, I'd ask for more information.
Mm-hmm. What
Almost
kind of
no
thing?
one,
don't you think, like saying what? Is asking for
it.
Okay.
And so you're one of the very few people who's ever given me that as a response, because that's a totally valid response. Wait, what's going on here? What brought that on is a very valid. No one says, call over a third party to help mediate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There are 100 things that could be response, but we almost always think of just one or maybe two. Why? Well, those are usually the ones that have been shown to us in the media all the time.
Yeah.
Right? If someone's aggressive, you're supposed to either run away or fight. We even talk about is fight or flight. No, there are 100 other things. And we don't even recognize how much our thinking has been channeled into these narrow little streams because it feels naturally. And we actually then, here's where the psychological science has something to say. There's a cognitive error that all of our brains make called the false consensus bias, which is anything you think most other people would agree with you. Anything you think most other people would think the same way. And except that's not at all true. Most other people think completely differently than you do. We just don't know that because we only know our own minds. And so we really overestimate how natural our patterns are, because that's all the experience we've had is our own minds. And we don't even know why we've been channeled into these types of patterns. So recognizing how we got here, that's the understanding of karma.
Yes.
helps us to recognize why you feel those pulls to go in only some directions and not others. And that once you recognize it and you stop and you feel that, in Buddhism, we'll talk about as karmic momentum. But you'll feel the pull to want to go one way. Just putting that pause in there, that's already a tremendous success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You almost always go with it
Mm-hmm.
because it feels like the right thing. But that's why we stay stuck. So putting that pause in, that helps. Now you have a chance to actually make a free choice. So again, a very pedestrian example. I'm one of those types of people who I go into a restaurant and I try things until I find the thing I like best. And then I only ever order that thing for years. And so I have restaurants where I walk in, they don't even hand me a menu. They know what I want. And I tip them very well for that. And I'm going to tell you that's my free choice. It isn't. It is never a free choice because I'm not choosing. I'm just going with what I already know I like. And so that's me being controlled. So what would be a free choice? Would be walking in, looking at the menu and choosing something I think I'll hate. That's the clearest example of a free choice, is going against your momentum. Now, it doesn't have to be choosing something you hate. It could be choosing something that I just don't know about. All right, I'll try this today.
Yes.
That's a free choice. It could even be choosing the same thing you always do. But you've got to stop the momentum, say, I always get this. Let's look at the menu. Does something else seem interesting to me today? And if at the end you go, no, I still want that, at least at that point, now it's actually a choice.
It's a choice. I see the difference. A big difference.
It's a huge difference, only we won't usually recognize that because we just go with what feels right, which is all your conditioned behavior from the past.
And what feels comfortable, because really so many of us just don't like the unknown, as
Right.
we know. That's a big thing too. I want to talk briefly about a new study that came out that suggests that people with high levels of stress and really, who doesn't have, so I guess all of us may be at greater risk for depressive symptoms. So, depression. But depression seems to be less severe in those who observe the 5 precepts of Buddhism,
Mm-hmm.
which is the fundamental system of ethics for the religion's followers, right? What are those 5 precepts, and what are your thoughts on that study?
Yeah. So the 5 precepts can be phrased differently, but in general, they are refraining from killing and promoting life is the first one. Refraining from sexual misconduct is another. I'm not getting them in the normal order.
Mm-hmm.
They are refraining from false speech or lying and promoting truth. Refraining from intoxicants that can cloud the mind. And refraining from taking what's not given or stealing.
Mm-hmm.
And these are the 5 precepts of Buddhism that most every Buddhist makes a vow that they're going to try to pay attention to. As you can tell, those have nothing to do with specifically being Buddhist. Every religion and no religions, atheists follow the, secular humanists. So those are just basic core ethical values.
Correct.
And so I don't think this study is special to Buddhism, because I think we've also seen in other studies that when people follow a religious tradition and take it to heart, that tends to be a protective factor against depression as well. So I don't know that it's special about Buddhism, but this study, if I recall it correctly, did look at, it was 92% Buddhist sample. Correct. Or something.
Yes.
And the ones who say they endorsed those more, because of course, even within a Buddhist sample, not everyone, even if they've all taken these precepts, not everyone thinks about them every day. Not everyone follows them. So the people who said they followed them more regularly, even when they were stressed, they had less depression based on that stress and anxiety than the people who didn't follow them quite as much. So I think that, we don't know what to make of that, because they didn't try to look at what are the psychological mediators or moderators, what's actually happening inside the black box that would account for that.
Mm-hmm.
But I could speculate on a couple of things. One is a level of trust in yourself, that to the extent that you feel like you have a strong basis in some spiritual grounding, that makes you feel like you can handle your situation. And again, it doesn't matter what religion this is. If you say, I place my faith in God and God is with me, that's the same thing. I can handle these stresses because I know I have my faith to rely on as a support. If you follow the Buddhist precepts, you know that you have taken to heart this ethical pathway, and that ethical pathway will be a support for you. You will get in far less trouble
This is true.
than if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of it may come down to a type of faith that different people might define differently, but I think of it as a faith in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That you trust that whatever the next moment brings, you can handle it.
That you'll be ready.
It may be terrible. It may be painful,
mm-hmm.
but that you at least have the tools, you can work with it to get through it. And that, I think, is a big buffer against depression, which has at its core for many people a way of thinking that you're not enough,
Mm-hmm.
that you can't handle it. It's too much. And you're never going to feel better. I mean, once you get into depression, I've had depression, it gets this cycle of thinking that I've never felt this bad in my life. Nothing can fix it. Nothing can make it better. And, that's where medications and therapy are so useful, is because they actually help you to recognize, no, this is just a disease. And with proper treatment, it can get better. But when you're in it, this is why so many people don't get treatment, because part of the way this disease works is it changes your thinking to believing nothing can help.
Right.
So I think if you have a strong foundation in whatever it is, in yourself, in your God, in your spiritual path, that is going to give you some buffer that even at intense levels of stress and anxiety, you don't fall into depression.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, that's just my hypothesis. I haven't studied that myself, but that's what makes sense to me as a psychologist.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me as well. And also, this whole study of faith and the role that faith can play in people's lives to actually age better. We know this to be true. And also because the sense of community that people have.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what you were just describing sounded like much more of an individual experience, but it seems to fall in line very much with all the other previous studies about some kind of faith and just feeling more prepared for challenges in life.
And you're exactly right that there are all these other things, that if you're part of a faith community, that, that provides other protective factors. And you're right, my focus is on the individual, partly because the Buddhist path tends to recognize that no one can really teach you anything. You have to figure it out for yourself. We can give you words to help guide you. We can give you feedback, but ultimately your awakening is your awakening. And how you get there will vary from person to person. And I don't like to use the word enlightenment because there are a lot of problems with that word too. And that's very misunderstood.
Yeah.
But I think, my definition of an enlightened or an awakened being is someone who trusts that the next moment will be workable.
Mm-hmm.
It's, we have this idea of Zen monks, being unflappable and having, no problems and, completely walking through everything with equanimity. Well, that's not at all true. I've known lots of Zen masters, and we have, I shouldn't say we, I'm not a master. They have as many problems as all the rest of us do. The Buddha himself had terrible problems in his life. His own cousin tried to kill him on 3 documented occasions.
Wow.
His best friend was murdered by his best friend's son, and that son then went on to slaughter all of the Buddha's family. The Buddha died, we think, of food poisoning, a very painful way to die. It's not that the Buddha totally awakened being, had no problems. He had lots of problems. He just didn't make them worse by doing the blame game of, why me, or how could you do this, and how could you, that he just worked with the situation as it was, trying to do what he could in that moment, and not compounding it, which is what so many of us do, is that, something annoying happens, and instead of just allowing yourself to be annoyed and figure out, okay, what can I do now? We get into these cycles of praise and blame, and why did you do that to me? And then we're into a retributional cycle many times, and that's, of course, going to definitely make things worse.
Yes.
Or we get into this victim mentality, that I don't deserve this. In either case, you're not actually working with the situation as it is. You're off in some fantasy land of your own making, which is not going to actually help anything. And again, this is where we miss the opportunity to actually make things better, and we stay stuck.
A really interesting kind of layer to this, as you're talking, I was thinking of this the whole, that nature versus nurture approach to viewing all of this, like how we respond to experiences. A lot of us pop out a certain way, maybe being more open or optimistic, others, more pessimistic or reserved, or whatever, you fill in the blank. And then obviously the nurture part is the life experiences that we've had, like what you've been talking about, that create those negative patterns of behavior or contribute to them anyway. So it's really interesting to me. It's so complicated. I mean, we could go on and on about this, or on. And I have so many questions about that. But I do want to get back to this whole, I guess, goal of happiness, because that's really what caused me to pay attention to your book. It was in the title. And then, of course, I read about it. And then I actually read the book. And now I'm talking with you about it. So let's get back to happiness. So should happiness, in fact, be the goal? Or should contentment be the goal? And is there a difference in your mind?
This is a question of semantics, and it's a place where semantics matter a lot, I think. The typical American definition of happiness tends to be some type of high energy peak experience, the top of the roller coaster.
Winning the lottery.
And it's not that those things aren't a type of happiness, but just by their very nature, they are unsustainable.
Yeah.
And the research that's come out in the positive psychology literature over the past 25 years has made it clear that those actually don't make us very happy. Winning the lottery makes you happy for a little while, and then you go back to being just as unhappy as you previously were. It's sometimes called the hedonic treadmill. Yes. That all the things we think will make us happy don't do it in any way that changes your baseline. And people do seem to have, coming to this nature nurture part, people do seem to have kind of different baselines. So how do we shift the baseline? And that's a very important question. And it comes from, the research is somewhat divided on this. Buddhism thinks it has an answer for this, and I'll give you that answer too. But the psychological research tends to show it comes from things like thinking of others. There is a great study by Sonia Lubomirska, a distinguished professor at University of California, Riverside, that I worked with for a little bit, where she randomly assigned college students for 2 weeks to do one of three things. Once a day, do something nice for someone else. Could be as minimal as holding open a door for them, or as giving them a cup of coffee, or, any minor thing. But once a day, do something nice for someone else. The second group, do something nice for the planet. So once a day, pick up a piece of trash, or turn off light, or ride your bike when you could have driven, whatever it is. The third, do something nice for yourself once a day. That could be treat yourself to ice cream, have a bubble bath, take a little reading break, doesn't matter what it is. She measured their happiness at the beginning of the study, at the end of the study. At the end of the study, the people who had done something nice for other people once a day, much happier, more content, less anxious. People who'd done something nice for the planet were happier, less anxious. The people who'd done something nice for themselves once a day, no benefit whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Incredible.
All these things we hear about self-care are wrong. Well, or not wrong, they're misguided. Other care is self-care. But just doing something selfish that you think of as nice for yourself is not actually self-care. It's just doubling down on the things that already make you selfish and keep you stuck.
I want to stop right there. I am really taken by what you just said. Other care is self-care. That's brilliant. I am hoping that everyone is going to hold on. If you don't remember anything, everyone, remember that. That was great. I am going to make that one of my new mantras. Other care is self-care. And I'm familiar with the study that to which you referred. And it's, it was really incredible. But expand on that. So as a psychologist, why do you think this is? Is there some reason?
Well, yeah, shouldn't be surprising again, because in your own experience, when you've done things that are truly helpful for other people, you feel good.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, yes, we can get into the really pedantic argument. Well, is anything really altruism then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's irrelevant. That's the type of thing pointy-headed academics like me love to argue about that really are not worth arguing about.
Okay.
The empirical fact is when we are actually truly thinking of others, we feel better ourselves too. And so why is that the case? Well, I think partly because it recognizes the reality of who we are. We aren't independent beings, as you mentioned earlier. We are all
connected.
Buddhism doesn't have the concept of sin per se. The closest thing to an original sin in Buddhism is called ignorance. And what is that core ignorance? What is it we're ignorant of? And the core ignorance is Buddhism is that we believe self is separate from other. And the minute we feel that, we're already mistaken, and we will start doing things. Then everything becomes transactional. The minute I think of you as different from me, as other than me, now you can be a threat, or you can do something to me. You can be an object that gratifies me in some way. And the minute we treat people like that, they are more unhappy and we are more unhappy. And so all these things we do to try to get what we want from others, we are much more likely to make ourselves and them unhappy because it's based on this simple ignorance that we aren't really separate. And so when we are doing things for others, we are coming back to the truth that we aren't truly separate, which is why helping others makes us feel better. And we stop doubling down on this mistake. So I think that's one reason why it helps us feel better, is because it's cutting through that core ignorance that we have. But I think it's also because we do get something out of it, right? When we are helpful to others, they tend to, psychology says, reciprocity is a norm.
Right.
That people want to reciprocate, and we like that too. So without trying to get something from someone else is when you actually get something from someone else.
Yes.
And when it feels obligatory, I gave you a present at Christmas, so you should give me a present at Christmas. I don't really enjoy your present the same way. Right? And you don't enjoy mine the same way if we think we should be giving each other presents.
Yeah, we've all experienced that.
Exactly. And so, yes, the reciprocity norm, when we rely on it, kind of hurts. When it just bubbles up naturally, it's wonderful.
It also really makes me feel very optimistic about people, and that the fact that doing something kind or good for someone else, even spontaneously, makes you feel good. I mean, that just is that's a very positive experience. And which makes me feel that deep down, I think most people are good. Like they're coming from good.
They are.
And maybe circumstances, experiences, life can make them different.
That's a core tenet of Buddhism, which is we are all basically good.
But get back to my question, which I don't think we answered, about contentment.
Contentment, yes.
Because
I like contentment
just kind of, because happiness, as we were saying, the lottery or getting, winning $1 million or whatever that moment is in time, and then we'll be happy. But isn't contentment like that nice little kind of hum that hums along? Tell us about that. What are your thoughts?
Let me answer it in a sideways way. Mm-hmm. If we recognize that all the way things are in the world right now, that could be from the minor things like the aches and pains I feel, it's to the war in the Ukraine, to suffering of displaced persons, to political strife, all the things that are in this moment are there because of actions and decisions and causes and conditions in the past, right? For anything to be different right now means something would have had to have been different in the past.
Right.
Again, this is a karma teaching, right? The actions and taken in the past and the causes and conditions of the past condition this moment to be the way it is. So there's absolutely no possible way for this moment to be other than it is, which in a funny way means everything is perfect right now. Everything is exactly how it has to be. There is no possible way for it to be any other way. So in fact, it's perfect. Now, that doesn't mean injustice doesn't exist. That doesn't mean suffering doesn't exist. But if I'm sitting there angry about how things are, I'm kind of putting my effort into the wrong place. If I accept that things are difficult right now because they need to be difficult right now, okay, I am all of a sudden back to contentment, which means I'm in a much better place to actually put my effort into action in a way that might change the future in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We are running out of time at this point, and I want to have you come back on because there are so many more things we have to talk about, because every time you said something, I had about 4 or 5 questions I wanted to ask, and I didn't get to the vast majority of them.
I would be happy to come back.
Do you have 3 key takeaways that you really want everyone to remember from today's conversation? But we covered so much. I don't know how you could distill it into 3. But if you don't mind doing that, I would like to for sure offer one up right now. And it's what I said before. Other care is self-care. That just was so powerful to me, and something that I'm going to be sharing when I start to, talk about this episode.
Thank you.
What would you like to add to that?
Well, I think a core message I have is you are enough. You always have been. You always will be. And that we can learn to trust that. And it's really funny because we think we learn from our experience, but this is a place where we don't seem to. Your whole life, you've had great things happen. You've had horrible things happen. You've had things happen that you wish would never happen to anyone. Right? We've all had lots of different experiences. And you're still here because you've gotten through it. You were enough. It might not have felt like that, but in fact, you had what it took to work with your own experience. I don't mean without scars. We all get scarred, right? I don't mean without consequences. Here's a part of karma. When things happen, there will be consequences, and some of those we may carry with us forever. But that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. You actually have always had what it took to get through and manage and handle all of your experience. So why are we so scared that the next moment is going to bring us an experience that somehow we can't handle? Your actual lived experience, your whole life is you have been enough. Why don't you trust that?
Thank you for that. This is a message that people really need to hear. Thank you for that. So you will come back. We'll pick up on this conversation. I'm wishing you all the luck in the world. You don't need luck, but good wishes for your next book, which I'm really eager to read and to hear that it's going to be published and when.
First, I have to write it.
Yeah, you will. It's a great concept. So please do. And thank you again. Thank you so much for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. If you enjoyed this episode of Gruff Talk, please do 2 things. First, share it with all your friends and family, and subscribe to Gruff Talk wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, so you never miss a single episode. Until next time, remember this: we can't control getting older, but we can control how we do it. Talk to you soon. Age Better Podcast is a proud member of the Sound Advice Network. Sound Advice, women's voices amplified.